My first official press screening, y'all. I know that's cheesy. I couldn't help myself, but that was a pretty exciting moment to get the invitation to attend an actual press screening for this movie. So I took Netflix up on the offer, and it was interesting. I showed up, there was a representative there, there were other critics there, and we had a sheet of paper for us to put our information, our initial reaction, and some further comments that we had about the movie. So if you can't tell by now, it was for the upcoming Netflix film, The Killer, directed by David Fincher, and I'm going to start off by saying I enjoyed it. I thought it was very well done. For the most part, there was one con that I wrote down, and I'll get to that later. But basically, it's about an assassin. And this story is based on, I looked it up to find out if it was based on a book, because I thought, oh, this might be interesting. If it's an actual book, I wouldn't mind listening to the audiobook, but it's not. It's based on not a book, but a graphic novel, a French graphic novel. And so the screenplay was adapted from that. And I really liked how the story unfolded, and something that I wrote in my initial reaction line that the Netflix representative had given to us, I think my exact words were, kept me intrigued from start to finish, or something like that. And it really did, because there was something interesting about the way this story unfolded. I'll give you a bit of the premise before I delve into specifics on the things that I liked. The premise is, as I said, he's a hitman. He's on this job, something goes awry. And because something goes awry, things come back around to bite him personally. After that happens, the rest of the movie is taken up with him pretty much on a revenge quest and tracking down the people responsible for what happened that affected him personally. And it was interesting that this movie got started out with his character giving this narration. There is not a ton of dialogue in this movie. I didn't really pick up on that until it was about, the first 20 minutes. And I think he hadn't said a word himself, just the narration. So you hear him talking, but there's not really any interaction that he's having with people. And I was thinking that was an interesting tactic. It worked pretty well, because it was about halfway through the film I was realizing that this movie was implementing the recommended practice of show, don't tell. So we're dropped into this guy's life. He's on this job. Something goes awry. Something happens to him personally because of that. And then he sets out on his mission. And as he's going through everything, he's not telling you, oh, I need to find out who did this. I need to find out who's behind this. And I need to go find this person. And then I need to get the information. No, you just see it happening. It just happens. They're just showing you. They're not telling you, oh, I need to figure out how to copy this key fob so that I can get into. No, it just shows you how he goes about doing this. And you realize, oh, okay, he's trying to figure out how to get. So it was really well done. I liked that a lot. Something else that was interesting was about the narration. He had these mantras, or I guess maybe like these personal rules. Don't show empathy. Don't stray from the plan. And when he would say these things, you could see that he was trying to reassert those principles in his mind, because he was coming close to maybe straying from that. And there were times that he did stray. But something also that was fascinating was you couldn't necessarily predict when he would stray or when he wouldn't. I thought that I could predict certain things he was going to do, and he would do something just the opposite. This dude was a cold-blooded killer, and yet you're on this journey with him and you're almost pulling for him, because it's crazy, because he does stuff that you don't necessarily agree with or support or whatever, but he is the main character. And I don't know if I could go so far as to say he's the protagonist, because he's not like he's a good guy, but he's the protagonist in this story. I don't know if that's even accurate to call, whatever. He's the main character. He's not necessarily a good guy, but you're with him and you're kind of rooting for him to get to the bottom of the situation that he was in. And yet there would be moments where he would do things that would remind you, oh, this dude, he has no compunction about killing to accomplish this goal that he has. And he kind of lays that out for you at the very beginning when he talks about these different rules, and it shows him he has a very regimented routine. He keeps track of his heart rate with his fitness watch thing, and he's shows that how he's calming his heart rate down to a certain level that he knows is what it needs to be in order to carry out what he's got to do. It was very interesting, and I was drawn in the entire time. I have no complaints at all about the pacing. Hold on a moment.
Levi wants to be with you.
He just jumped down. Can you pick him up and hand him to me? Just hand him over here. Okay. What was I saying?
Did you just hit him in the face?
No, I think his little face at the... What was I saying when you walked in? Something else I was going to say was, I was just looking at my list. The film narratively was broken up into chapters. I can't remember what the title of the first chapter was, but I noticed that the subsequent chapters had titles like The Client, The Brute, and this was an introduction you were having to the different people that he was going after. And I looked up the cast list for this and I realized, yeah, we never got his name. He's just called The Killer, and other people in the cast are just the lawyer or the brute or the expert or the client. There's only a handful of people that have actual names in this story. That was another thing that was interesting to me. I also liked different touches with the cinematography. There's a scene where, I'll just give you some examples. There's a scene where he's looking through his scope because he's getting ready to fire this shot, and it's focusing on his eye through the scope. It was just was little tiny touches like that I really liked. Another thing that, it's very simple, right? But there was just something about the way that was all laid out and set up for you that I liked. Another example is he's tossing his motorcycle helmet into the river because as he goes along, he gets rid of his evidence in different places. He disposes of it in different places. And it just so happens he's walking over a bridge and he tosses his motorcycle helmet into the river. And they could just leave it at that. But no, the camera shows the motorcycle helmet floating to the bottom of the water. And at first I thought, oh, is this going to mean something? Or are they going to find his helmet and somehow... No, they're just showing the helmet. It didn't necessarily mean anything. It was just an interesting little touch that was added to the technical aspects of how these scenes played out that I appreciated a lot. Something else that I noticed was I had looked up the runtime, and it had initially said the runtime for this was 150 something minutes. So I was settled in for a 2.5 hour or so showtime, and no, this is actually right around 2 hours. When the press screening started, it started at 7 o'clock on the dot, and there were no trailers. Yes, I like that part. And it was over right around 9. So it's not as long as I thought. I don't know why that runtime was indicated at that number, because that was not accurate. Something else also that I liked about the film was there's a scene where he is there's not a ton of action. I'll say that much right now. It's mostly this story of him tracking down the people responsible for what happens. There is a scene where there is an actual full-on fight between him and another person. And I really liked how that was filmed because, for one thing, when they would show punches being thrown, it wasn't that, I'm sure that there was audio overlaid, but it didn't sound like that typical pow, that sound you hear when people are punching, and you're thinking to yourself, that it doesn't sound like that when people hit. This sounded a little bit more realistic, but also something that I really liked about this fight scene was that it didn't look like it was choreographed. It looked like they were really fighting to the death, and it was almost entirely filmed in a darkened room. So any sort of signs that you would have had, or sort of things that you could pick up on that would show that it was choreographed, were probably hidden in the darkness. And it felt like a literal scuffle not a scuffle, a literal fight to the death. It was bloody. It was using everything within reach type of weaponry that was going on. And it was very effectively done. And I liked it enough that I put fight scene ! In dark. I thought that was worth mentioning. Something else that I wanted to bring up was that I knew ahead of time that Tilda Swinton was going to be in here, but in all honesty, I had forgotten that she was going to show up until we were almost an hour and a half into the movie, and there she was. And then I was like, oh, okay. There's this scene with him and her, and I liked how that played out. It was very dialogue heavy and acting very much done with the face. And then what happened after that, it surprised me, but I thought it was pretty interesting when it happened. And then also another person that played in here, another recognizable face that played in here. Well, there were a few. The lawyer guy, I recognized him. I think he's the guy that played in Top Gun Maverick as Warlock. Another character in here, Arliss Howard, I think is his name. I first noticed him in a movie from the 80s, or maybe the very early 90s, called I Know My First Name is Steven, which was based on the story of Steven Stayner. And Arliss Howard played the guy who, it's a true life story, he played the guy who kidnapped Steven. And I never forgot him because of that miniseries. And so he plays in here. He has a bit of a part in here. This is not a cast-heavy movie. The focus of this film is, first and foremost, on Michael Fassbender's character, and his presence takes up the vast majority of the story. So characters that he interacts with here and there in different segments of the film, they're not around necessarily for the entirety of the story because we're just taking this journey with him, and he doesn't take everybody with him through the journey. And so Tilda Swinton, for example, is probably only in this movie for like 15 minutes at most. So that was something I wasn't expecting either. I did not expect that the layout of this was going to be segmented the way it was. I'm not complaining about it. I'm just saying I didn't expect it. I found it interesting, and I thought it was handled really well. So something else I thought was interesting was I stayed through to the rest of the credits and couldn't help but notice references to COVID in the credits, like COVID HSC and COVID HSC coordinator or whatever. And I think that had something to do with like whoever was coordinating vaccinations or something. And I was like, wow, if that isn't a time capsule into the early 2020s, I don't know what else would be. The only other time capsule would be showing people wearing masks all over the place. Anyway, whatever. That was just something I noticed. So I'm going to move now into just the one little con that I had about this movie, and that was the final showdown that happens, because, you know, this whole movie is his journey to find out the different people responsible for what happened that set him on this mission. And the final showdown can best be described as anticlimactic. And what happened at the end of that showdown felt out of character, and so I was confused. And I was talking with some of the other people that were there at the press screening, talking about, you know, why did such and such happen? And one of the ladies there was telling me why she thought it was, and I could see that, but then part of me couldn't, because there were things he did with other people that seemed to match more his character, or this construction of his character that you're given. And then at the end, when he does something that doesn't quite line up with what this character has been built up to be in your mind, I kind of feel like at that point, I would have liked a little bit more telling. Breaking my rule of liking the show, don't tell. But it was minor, and I would definitely recommend this film to anyone who's a David Fincher fan and anyone who's a Michael Fassbender fan. I thought he did great, and that's Arliss Howard there. I thought he did great in here. And I had to remind myself what David Fincher has done, because it's a name I recognize, but it's not one of those director names where like Steven Spielberg, oh yeah, Steven Spielberg, E.T., Steven Spielberg this, Steven Spielberg that. I had to look up David Fincher. I know this name. I know I've liked some of his movies. What has he done? And then I saw that he had done the American version, or the English language version, of The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, which I really like that movie, and saw that there were some other things he'd done that I definitely recognize, and feels like his style, from what I can remember of The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo and whatever other films of his I've seen. And so I thought it was very effectively done. I'm not familiar with the source material, so anybody who has maybe read the original graphic novel, you have something to compare it to. I don't. So I don't know how faithful this was to that. If any of you have read the graphic novel, please chime in and let me know what you think about this adaptation of that original story. I think that's about all I have to say about this. The Killer is having a limited theatrical release starting October 27th. I had mistakenly mentioned to one of the girls I talked to that it was coming to Netflix on October 27th. That's not accurate. Limited theatrical release, and then it's coming to Netflix on November 10th. So in just a few weeks, you guys will be able to check it out. I recommend it, and hopefully you guys will enjoy it as well. I thought it was pretty solid. Yeah. No huge complaints, just that one tiny little thing. And maybe upon a rewatch, I will feel differently about this thing that bothered me at the end. So, yep, that's all I've got. Wrapping this up, and we'll see you guys later. Nos vemos.